structured and consistent approach to money allows people to grow their wealth over time. How our money is divided between our needs and priorities is something every family must deal with constantly. And it is not an easy task to decide what's more important: to pay off debt or pay for kids' music lessons, to buy sports gear or have a night out with the family, to save money towards retirement or a college fund. So we look around for help, and we come across several ways towards money management. In this video, I will be covering 6 most common methods to managing money, as well as advantages and disadvantages of each. At the end, I will also be sharing my #1 tip for busy families who don't have a lot of time to dedicate to constant money tracking routines. So stay tuned for that. Before we get started, I'd like to take a minute and point out that what most people call money management methods these days are actually budgeting methods. It's just the word budgeting has been misused in so many ways over the last several years that most people attach a negative connotation to it now. It is also important to understand that budgeting is only step 3 in a successful money management approach, and there are 2 other things you should have completed prior to sitting down and deciding how much you'll be spending on that sporting gear or that new car payment of yours. If you are not sure what those other 2 things are, I will go ahead and link another video of mine below that can help. It is titled How to Manage Your Money, 3 Easy Steps, and you will be able to find a link to it in the description below. Okay, so let's get started. The first method we're discussing today is zero-based budget. In this method, your income minus your expenses would equal 0. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you spend everything you make with no room to save. It just means that every dollar you make is planned out ahead of time, including those dollars dedicated to saving. That being said, since this method does not specifically call for savings, it would be easy to end up in a paycheck-to-paycheck situation with this. So who is this method for? A zero-based budget works well for those people whose income and expenses stay pretty much the same every single month. If, however, your expenses vary, which is pretty common for most people and most families, then you would need to make adjustments and build in cushions for various situations that come up, from car repairs to back-to-school shopping. For example, if in August you plan on spending $120 for school supplies, then you would need to start saving for it a year in advance and set aside $10 every single month to make it work. This is not flexible and way too cumbersome for most, so very rarely I recommend this method to anyone. Our second method today is cash envelope method, and it is a more restrictive version of a zero-based budget we just covered. Here, in addition to having no flexibility over your expenses, you now have an additional restrictions of having to pay with cash only for those expenses. Now, this method does gain popularity periodically, and it is said to benefit people who are really bad at keeping track of their cards. This method can be tricky, however, because it can be tempting to spend all of the money right away from your envelope and then having no money left for later where you might need it. Time can be an obstacle when using this method because placing cash in the envelopes is a chore in and of itself, where you will need to make frequent trips to the bank to make withdrawals. Then, of course, you'll need to make time to actually put the money in the envelopes. When done weekly, you can expect spending anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour to complete this task. Some additional disadvantages to think about when it comes to cash envelopes is finding room to store and carry these envelopes on you, risking being mugged when seen paying with cash, and feeling embarrassed using this method. This is my least favorite method of all money management tactics, and I don't ever recommend anyone using it. The third method is pay yourself first method, and here you schedule your savings and debt repayment first before dedicating any money to the rest of the expenses. This is the first method we're discussing today that actually has savings being part of the plan, and it's a good thing. The rest of the method has you take your expenses and allocate appropriate amount to each until your income runs out. This disadvantages of this method, unfortunately, are very similar to the first two we covered today, in that there's still a lot of categories of expenses to keep track of, and there's still not a lot of flexibility offered around seasonal and unpredictable expenses. This is not my favorite budgeting method, but I would recommend it over the first two we covered today. Method number 4 is 50-30-20 budget. In this method, 50% of your income is dedicated towards base expenses, 30% towards lifestyle expenses, and 20% towards savings. Out of all the methods we've covered today so far, this one is my favorite because for the first time, we're seeing 3 simple categories that offer a lot of flexibility. This is especially great when it comes to lifestyle spending because if you want to take your 30% and use it towards going out one week, clothes shopping the next week, weekend getaway the third, you can. And there's no money you need to shuffle around between categories. Where it's not so great is your base category because sure, your 50% needs to include things like housing, transportation, and food, but it doesn't quite offer enough guidance as to what are all of the things it needs to include. Lastly, I do enjoy that savings is also part of the plan here. Overall, I'd say that this method is a good contender, and most people would see benefit in using it. However, if you're getting started and your percentages are way off right off the get-go, for example, maybe your housing payment is very high, or maybe daycare is beyond expensive in your area, then you may find it difficult, or in some cases even impossible, to arrive at these percentages. And you may feel discouraged and even hopeless as a result. If this is you, please keep in mind that this is not a one-size-fits-all method. Just keep on looking. You'll find something that works for you. Our method number 5 is having no method. Having no budget and just making decisions one day at a time is something all of us practice at least once in our lifetimes. I did. If you did also, hit the like button below. The reality is, there is nothing to be ashamed of here. Just remember that having no financial plan is probably stopping you from achieving some of your goals and dreams, and it is likely introducing some stress and anxiety around money in your life too. So if you haven't had a budget up to this point, right now is a good time to consider making one. Last but not least is number 6, and it is personalized budget. This is a plan created just for you and your family that takes your unique set of circumstances into consideration. Yes, it is nice to have common budgeting methods, and you may even be able to find one that works for you. However, if you're like most people, then personalized budget is the only way to truly take all factors into consideration and really focus on things that are important to you and your family. The downside of this method is that it's not readily available to most, and not a lot of information is out there to help you create one. In many cases, it would require you hiring a professional to review your situation and offer a solution, and hiring a professional often costs money. But don't be too sad, because I started this channel to help solve this very problem. Once upon a time, I too was struggling to find good and reliable information to help build my family's budget. And now, many years later, I have lots of tips and tricks to share about how to make your money work for you. So hit that subscribe button below to stay in the know. And this brings us to my final tip that I promise to those of you who are busy and don't have time for a budgeting routine. Don't worry about keeping track of most of your expenses, especially things like mortgage, car payment, or utilities. Chances are those are more or less the same from one month to the next, and there's really not much you can change there anyways. Instead, pick 3 areas where you have the most control over. So things like groceries or entertainment, and track those. Challenge yourself to spend less there too. For example, if you currently spend $150 on food every week, challenge yourself to spend $125. Do this for all 3 categories, and all of a sudden you'll find yourself with some extra money to pay off debt, contribute towards emergency savings, or even go on a vacation. Happy budgeting. This was Alona, and I'll see you in my next video.